My father tried to cancel my birthday trip because my golden child sister had a runny nose. My name is Kyle, and this is the story of how I learned that sometimes blood isn't thicker than favoritism, and how my father's worst nightmare eventually became his reality. Growing up in suburban Phoenix, Arizona, I always knew something was off about how Dad treated my younger sister Amber compared to me. But it wasn't until that devastating day before my 15th birthday that I truly understood just how little I meant to him. Our family wasn't shy about acknowledging Dad's blatant favoritism. Even our relatives called him out on it during Sunday dinners at Grandma's house. Uncle Pete would shake his head and mutter, "Tom, you're being ridiculous again," whenever Dad would jump up to get Amber a glass of chocolate milk while I sat there with an empty cup. But Dad never denied it. In fact, he had what he considered a perfectly reasonable explanation. "She looks exactly like your mother," he'd say, his voice getting that distant quality it always took on when he talked about Mom. "When I look at Amber, it's like seeing Rebecca again. I can't help myself. Mom had died in a car accident when I was 8 and Amber was 5. I remembered Mom too, her warm laugh, the way she'd ruffle my hair when I brought home good grades from Jefferson Elementary, how she'd make Mickey Mouse pancakes on Saturday mornings. But apparently my memories weren't enough to earn Dad's love. Only Amber's striking resemblance to our late mother could do that. Amber caught on to this dynamic early and wielded it like a weapon. All she had to do was walk into the living room where Dad was watching the Phoenix Suns game, tilt her head with that innocent expression and say, "Please, Daddy?" and whatever she wanted would materialize. A new Barbie doll from Target, a trip to Dairy Queen for a blizzard, permission to have a sleepover with her friends from Roosevelt Middle School, it was all hers for the asking. Meanwhile, if I wanted something, even something as simple as a new basketball or permission to go to the movies with my buddies Jake and Connor, Dad's response was always the same: "What have you done to deserve it, Kyle?" If I couldn't immediately recall some recent good deed or stellar test grade, the answer was a firm no. The consequences for bad behavior were equally skewed. When Amber broke Dad's favorite coffee mug, the one that said "World's Greatest Dad," that I'd given him for Father's Day 2 years earlier, she just started crying those crocodile tears. Dad immediately swept her up in a hug saying, "It's okay, sweetheart. Accidents happen." But when I accidentally left my bike in the driveway and Dad scraped it backing out his Ford F-150, I was grounded for 2 weeks and had to pay for the truck's paint touch-up out of my allowance. The health disparities were perhaps the most telling. Amber could get a tiny splinter from the playground at Sunset Park, and Dad would leave his job at the construction company to pick her up from school and take her to urgent care. But when I came down with the flu last winter, throwing up every hour and running a fever of 102, Dad told me to tough it out, because he couldn't miss an important meeting with contractors. I tried everything to earn his attention and affection. I became an honor roll student at Desert Vista High School, hoping academic achievement would make him proud. When that didn't work, I tried acting out, staying out past curfew, talking back, even getting detention once for disrupting Mr. Rodriguez's history class. Nothing. I even forced myself to develop an interest in his hobbies, spending countless Saturday afternoons learning about carburetor repairs and watching him work on classic Mustangs in our garage, desperately hoping we'd bond over tools and engine parts. But nothing worked. No matter what I did, I remained invisible to him while Amber basked in the golden glow of his undivided attention. The day I finally gave up trying was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my young life. Instead, it became the day I learned exactly how little my father valued me, and how a simple runny nose could reveal the true depth of his indifference. My 15th birthday was supposed to be epic. 4 weeks, I'd been planning the perfect celebration. A trip to Golfland Sunsplash, this massive arcade and water park complex about 2 hours away in Mesa. It wasn't just any arcade, this place had everything. Racing simulators, the newest fighting games, laser tag, go-karts, and enough prize tickets to win something actually cool instead of the usual plastic spider rings and Tootsie Rolls you'd get at Chuck E. Cheese. Dad had actually seemed excited about the plan when I first brought it up. He'd even volunteered to drive, which was huge because he rarely initiated anything involving me. The guest list was solid. My 2 best friends from school, Jake Martinez and Connor Walsh, plus my Uncle Pete and, unfortunately, Amber. I would have preferred to leave her at home, but Dad insisted she come along. "Family sticks together," he'd said, though I noticed this rule only seemed to apply when Amber wanted to be included in something. Uncle Pete had been pumping me up about it all week. "Kyle, my boy, we're going to dominate those arcade games," he'd said during our last phone call. "I've been practicing my skee-ball technique just for this occasion." Uncle Pete was Dad's younger brother, but unlike Dad, he'd always treated Amber and me equally. He never missed my baseball games at Phoenix Municipal Stadium, always remembered my birthday and actually listened when I talked about school or my friends. The plan was foolproof. We'd leave early Saturday morning in Dad's F-150, spend the entire day at Golfland, grab dinner at In-N-Out Burger on the way home, and I'd go to bed that night with a truck full of arcade prizes and memories that would last forever. Jake had been saving up his allowance for weeks so he could challenge me to every racing game in the place, and Connor had been boasting about his air hockey skills, claiming he was going to school me in front of everyone. Friday afternoon, the day before my birthday, I was practically bouncing off the walls with excitement. School had dragged by slower than molasses. Mrs. Peterson's English class felt like it lasted 3 hours instead of 50 minutes, and I couldn't concentrate on anything except thoughts of tomorrow's adventure. I kept checking the clock, counting down the hours until I could officially be 15 and celebrate properly. When I walked through our front door that afternoon, I was ready to confirm all the final details with Dad. Maybe we could even stop by Circle K to stock up on snacks for the drive. But instead of finding Dad making preparations for our trip, I found him in the kitchen with a concerned expression, checking on Amber, who was sitting at our breakfast counter looking perfectly normal except for occasionally sniffling. "What's wrong?" I asked, setting my backpack down by the sliding door that led to our backyard patio. "Amber's coming down with something," Dad said, pressing the back of his hand to her forehead with the tenderness of a nurse checking on a critical patient. "She's got the sniffles and I think she might be developing a fever." I looked at Amber more closely. She sniffled once, delicately like a princess in a Disney movie. Her nose was maybe slightly pink, but she was sitting up straight, playing on her phone, and had just finished eating a bowl of Lucky Charms. She looked about as sick as someone who'd walked through a field of daisies and caught a whiff of pollen. "She looks fine to me," I said carefully, trying to keep my voice neutral. A weird feeling was starting to creep up my spine, a cold dread that whispered this wasn't going to end well for me. Dad shot me a sharp look. "Kyle, your sister is clearly under the weather. We can't drag her to an arcade for 8 hours when she needs rest and recovery." The room suddenly felt like all the oxygen had been sucked out of it. "Wait, what are you saying exactly?" "I'm saying we're going to have to postpone your birthday celebration until Amber feels better. It wouldn't be responsible to expose her to all those germs at a public place, and she certainly can't handle a long car ride feeling like this." The words hit me like a physical blow. Postpone. Not reschedule, not modify the plans, postpone indefinitely because my sister had sniffled twice. "Dad, you can't be serious," I said, hearing my voice crack slightly. "It's my birthday tomorrow. We've had this planned for weeks. Jake and Connor are counting on it. Uncle Pete cleared his whole Saturday. Kyle, I understand you're disappointed, but family comes first. Amber's health is more important than some arcade games." Some arcade games. Like my 15th birthday was just some trivial thing that could be shuffled around whenever convenient. Like all my excitement, all my planning, all my hope for one perfect day with my father meant absolutely nothing compared to Amber's barely noticeable sniffles. "What if we leave her with Grandma and Grandpa?" I suggested desperately. "They love having her over and she can rest there while we're gone. She'll probably feel better by the time we get back." Dad's expression hardened. "I'm not leaving your sister to suffer alone while we go off having fun. What kind of father would that make me?" The irony wasn't lost on me. What kind of father cancels his son's birthday over a runny nose? But I could see it in his eyes. The decision was already made. Amber came first. Amber would always come first. "Call your friends and let them know," Dad said, already walking away to tend to his precious daughter. "I need to call Pete and cancel with him too." And just like that, my birthday was sacrificed on the altar of Amber's barely there cold. As Dad walked away to make his calls, I stood frozen in our kitchen, staring at the black and white checkered tiles beneath my feet. The devastating reality crashed over me like a cold wave. My 15th birthday was canceled because my sister had the sniffles. Not the flu. Not strep throat. Not even a legitimate cold with a cough and congestion. Just some minor nasal irritation that any normal person would ignore. I felt the tears coming before I could stop them. All the excitement, all the anticipation, all the hope I'd built up over the past few weeks, it all crumbled in an instant. I rushed to my bedroom, slamming the door behind me harder than I probably should have, and collapsed face first onto my bed with the navy blue comforter Mom had helped me pick out years ago. The tears came in waves. Big, ugly, shoulder-shaking sobs that I tried to muffle into my pillow so Dad wouldn't hear. I wasn't just crying about the canceled trip, I was crying about years of being second place, years of watching Amber get everything while I got excuses. I was crying about the father who claimed to love me but consistently proved otherwise with every decision he made. For about 20 minutes, I let myself feel sorry for myself. I thought about all the things Jake, Connor, and I had planned to do. The new racing simulator we were going to try. The laser tag arena where we were going to form an unstoppable team. The skee-ball tournament Uncle Pete had jokingly organized via text messages all week. All of it gone. Cancelled. Postponed indefinitely for a girl who wasn't even legitimately sick. I was just starting to compose myself, wiping my eyes with the sleeve of my Phoenix Suns t-shirt, when my phone rang. Uncle Pete's name flashed on the screen, and for a moment I considered not answering. I didn't want to hear his disappointment, his apologies, his promises that we'd do something else another time. But something made me pick up on the fourth ring. "Hey, Uncle Pete," I managed, trying to keep my voice steady. "Kyle, buddy, I just got off the phone with your dad." Uncle Pete's voice was different, not disappointed but angry. Really angry. "And I've got to tell you, what just happened is complete bullshit." I was so surprised to hear him curse. Uncle Pete rarely used strong language, that I almost forgot to be sad for a second. "Listen to me, kiddo," he continued, his voice getting more determined with each word. "Your dad might be willing to cancel your birthday over Amber's imaginary illness, but I'm not. How about this? I'll pick up you, Jake, and Connor tomorrow morning at 9, and we'll go to Golfland ourselves. What do you say?" My heart almost stopped. "Are you serious? You'd really do that?" "Kyle, I've been looking forward to this trip almost as much as you have. I've been practicing my arcade games on my phone all week, I've got a cooler full of sodas ready to go, and I'll be damned if some parental favoritism is going to ruin your 15th birthday." The relief that flooded through me was overwhelming. Someone cared. Someone thought my birthday was worth celebrating. Someone was willing to stand up to my dad's ridiculous decision and make sure I didn't spend my special day sulking in my bedroom. "What did Dad say when you told him?" I asked. Uncle Pete chuckled grimly. "Let's just say your father and I had what you might call a frank discussion about his parenting choices. But don't worry about that. This is between him and me. Your job is to be ready at 9 sharp tomorrow morning with your game face on." "Uncle Pete, thank you. Seriously. You have no idea what this means to me. Kyle, you're a good kid. You deserve to have people in your corner, and you deserve to have your birthday celebrated properly. Now call your friends and let them know the party's back on. Tell them Uncle Pete's driving, which means we're taking the scenic route and stopping for breakfast burritos at that place in Tempe I've been wanting to try." After I hung up, I sat on my bed for a few minutes just processing what had happened. In the span of one phone call, my birthday had been resurrected. Uncle Pete had done something my own father wouldn't do. He'd prioritized my happiness and made me feel like I mattered. I immediately called Jake, who whooped so loudly when I told him the good news that I had to hold the phone away from my ear. Then I called Connor, who responded with his characteristic dry humor. "Dude, your uncle is officially cooler than your dad." No offense. None taken, I thought. That night, I went to bed actually excited again. Tomorrow was going to be awesome, even if it wouldn't include my father. Maybe especially because it wouldn't include my father. For once, I was going to spend my birthday surrounded by people who genuinely wanted to be there, people who thought I was worth celebrating. As I drifted off to sleep, I could hear Dad and Amber in the living room watching some Disney movie. Her occasional fake cough echoed through the house, a reminder of how easily she could manipulate our father. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel jealous or angry. I felt free. Saturday morning arrived with perfect Arizona sunshine streaming through my bedroom window. I woke up naturally at 7:30, which never happened on weekends, but I was too excited to sleep in. Today was my 15th birthday, and despite my father's best efforts to ruin it, it was going to be amazing. I could hear Dad in the kitchen making his usual Saturday morning coffee, probably checking on Amber's condition, every few minutes like she was in intensive care instead of dealing with minor nasal congestion. I didn't even bother going downstairs to say good morning. There was no point in pretending we were one big happy family when we both knew the truth. Instead, I took my time getting ready. I put on my favorite outfit, my lucky red Arizona Diamondbacks jersey and my most comfortable jeans. I grabbed my wallet, made sure I had enough cash for arcade games and snacks, and even packed a small backpack with my portable phone charger and a bottle of water. At exactly 9 o'clock, Uncle Pete's silver Honda Pilot pulled into our driveway. Through my bedroom window, I could see him getting out of the car with a big grin on his face, wearing a tropical print shirt that screamed, "Fun Uncle." Jake and Connor were already in the back seat, both waving enthusiastically when they spotted me at the window. I bounded down the stairs 2 at a time, my excitement building with each step. Dad was in the living room with Amber, who was dramatically sprawled across the couch with a box of tissues that appeared to be mostly for show. "I'm leaving," I announced, shouldering my backpack. Dad looked up with a slightly confused expression, like he'd forgotten I existed. Leaving? Where are you going? Uncle Pete's taking us to Golfland for my birthday, remember? The trip you canceled. For just a moment, something that might have been guilt flashed across Dad's face. But then Amber let out a pitiful little cough, and his attention immediately snapped back to her. Oh. Well, have fun, he said absently, already reaching over to feel her forehead again. Have fun. That was it. No happy birthday, no, I wish I could come, no acknowledgement that this was a big day for me. Just, have fun, delivered with all the enthusiasm of someone commenting on the weather. I walked out the front door without another word. There's the birthday boy. Uncle Pete shouted, spreading his arms wide for a massive bear hug. 15 years old. Man, I remember when you were knee-high to a grasshopper, and now look at you, practically a grown man. Jake and Connor piled out of the pilot to join the group hug, both of them talking over each other in their excitement. Dude, I brought $20 in quarters for the arcade games, Jake said, patting a bulging pocket. I've been watching YouTube videos about laser tag strategy all week, Connor added. We're going to dominate. Uncle Pete ruffled my hair affectionately. All right, birthday crew, let's hit the road. First stop, Rosita's Kitchen in Tempe for the best breakfast burritos this side of the Mississippi. The drive to Tempe was everything I'd hoped the original trip would be. Uncle Pete had loaded his playlist with all my favorite songs. Everything from classic rock to the newer hip-hop tracks that Dad always complained were too loud and meaningless. We sang along badly to Journey's Don't Stop Believin', and laughed until our stomachs hurt when Connor attempted to rap along to an Eminem song. Rosita's Kitchen was this tiny hole-in-the-wall place with mismatched chairs and the most incredible smells wafting from the kitchen. Uncle Pete ordered for all of us 4 massive breakfast burritos loaded with scrambled eggs, chorizo, hash browns, cheese, and green chili that had just enough kick to wake up your taste buds without burning your tongue. To Kyle, Uncle Pete said, raising his orange juice in a toast. 15 years of being an awesome kid, and many more years of being an even more awesome man. Jake and Connor raised their drinks too. To Kyle. It was such a simple moment, but it meant everything to me. These people were here because they wanted to be, because they thought I was worth celebrating. Not because they had to be, not out of obligation or family duty, but because they genuinely cared about me. The drive from Tempe to Mesa flew by in a blur of laughter and anticipation. Uncle Pete regaled us with stories from his own 15th birthday, which apparently involved a disastrous camping trip where he accidentally set his sleeping bag on fire trying to make s'mores. Jake and Connor debated the merits of various arcade games with the seriousness of military strategists planning a campaign. When Golfland's Sunsplash finally came into view, I felt like a kid on Christmas morning. The place was massive, acres of water slides, go-kart tracks, miniature golf courses, and the crown jewel, a gigantic arcade that looked like something out of a sci-fi movie. Gentlemen, Uncle Pete announced as we pulled into the parking lot, prepare yourselves for the greatest arcade adventure in the history of mankind. We spent the first hour just exploring, mapping out our plan of attack. The racing simulators were even cooler than I'd imagined, full motion seats that tilted and vibrated with every turn and crash. The laser tag arena was like something out of a spy movie, with multiple levels, fog machines, and neon lights everywhere. But the real magic happened when we just started playing together. Uncle Pete turned out to be surprisingly good at air hockey, beating all of us with moves that seemed to defy physics. Jake dominated the basketball shooting games with the precision of a future NBA star. Connor proved his laser tag boasting wasn't empty. He moved through that arena like a ninja, picking us off one by one until he emerged victorious. And me? I felt like I was exactly where I belonged, surrounded by people who wanted to see me happy, celebrating a day that was actually about me for once. Hours passed without any of us noticing. We played until our hands were sore from gripping joysticks, until our voices were hoarse from cheering each other on, until our pockets were empty of quarters and our arms were full of prizes. As the sun started to set and we finally headed back to Phoenix, I realized something profound. This had been the best birthday of my life, and my father's absence hadn't diminished it one bit. If anything, it had made it better. The ride home from Golfland was bittersweet. My arms were loaded with arcade prizes, a stuffed dragon I'd won playing skee-ball, a Phoenix Suns water bottle from the basketball game, and a collection of smaller trinkets that Jake and Connor had insisted I keep since it was my birthday. Uncle Pete had treated us to dinner at In-N-Out Burger, where we'd relived every highlight of our epic arcade adventure over animal-style burgers and chocolate shakes. But as we pulled into my neighborhood in Phoenix, reality started creeping back in. Soon I'd have to face Dad and Amber, and I'd have to return to the house where I was perpetually second place to my sister's every whim. Kyle, Uncle Pete said quietly as we sat in his Pilot outside my house, Jake and Connor having already been dropped off at their homes. I want you to know something. What happened yesterday, your dad canceling your birthday, that wasn't okay. It wasn't about Amber being sick. It was about priorities, and his priorities are screwed up. I nodded, clutching my stuffed dragon prize. I know, Uncle Pete. I've known for a long time. You're a good kid and you deserve better. Don't ever let anyone make you feel like you're not worth celebrating, okay? When I walked through the front door, Dad was in his usual spot on the couch, watching the late news. Amber was curled up next to him, looking perfectly healthy and completely recovered from her devastating case of the sniffles. She glanced up when she saw me, and her eyes immediately zeroed in on my armful of prizes. Oh wow, Kyle, what did you win? She asked, sitting up with sudden interest. I held up my collection of arcade treasures, feeling genuinely happy for the first time all week. Just some stuff from Golfland. We had an amazing time. Amber's eyes locked onto the stuffed dragon, which was admittedly pretty cool, purple and gold with sparkly wings and soft fur. That dragon is so cute. Can I have it? Please? The word no came out of my mouth before I even thought about it. Sorry, Amber. These are from my birthday trip. She immediately turned to Dad with those practiced puppy dog eyes. Dad, don't you think Kyle should share? It would be nice if he gave me something. Dad looked up from the TV with that familiar expression. The one that said I was about to be lectured about being a good big brother. Kyle, your sister's been sick all day while you were out having fun. It would be nice if you gave her one of your prizes. You won so many. You know what would be nice? I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. If you didn't try to cancel my birthday over Amber's runny nose. The room went dead silent. Dad's face darkened, and I could see Amber's eyes widen with surprise. No one talked back to Dad, especially not about his treatment of the golden child. Kyle, that's enough, Dad said sharply. Your sister's health is more important than some arcade games, and if you were a good big brother, you'd understand that. If you were a good father, I replied quietly, you'd understand that your son's 15th birthday is more important than your daughter's fake cold. I didn't wait for his response. I took my prizes and walked upstairs to my room, closing the door firmly behind me. I could hear Dad's angry voice and Amber's whimpering, but I didn't care. For the first time in my life, I'd stood up to him, and it felt incredible. That night marked a turning point in our relationship, or rather, the end of any pretense that we had a real relationship. I stopped trying to earn Dad's love and attention. I stopped forcing myself to care about his hobbies. I stopped hoping that someday he'd wake up and realize he had 2 children worth loving. Instead, I focused on the people who actually cared about me. Uncle Pete became like a second father, showing up to my baseball games at Desert Vista High School when Dad was too busy with Amber's soccer practices. My friends Jake and Connor became my chosen family, the brothers I never had. My teachers, coaches, and other relatives filled the gaps that Dad left empty. The change in my behavior was gradual but noticeable. I stopped asking Dad for permission to do things. I'd just make my plans and inform him afterward. I stopped sharing details about my life, my achievements, my dreams. When I made honor roll, I told Uncle Pete first. When I got my first job at a local movie theater, I celebrated with my friends. When I scored the winning goal in our district soccer championship, I looked up in the stands and saw Uncle Pete cheering, while Dad's seat remained empty because he was at one of Amber's cheerleading competitions. Dad either didn't notice the distance growing between us, or he didn't care as long as Amber was happy and healthy. And honestly, both possibilities hurt equally. The pattern continued through my sophomore, junior, and senior years. Every achievement, every milestone, every moment that should have been shared between father and son became something I experienced without him. And slowly, I realized I didn't miss his absence anymore. I'd built a life surrounded by people who valued me, and Dad's indifference couldn't touch that. But the real test of just how little I meant to him was still coming. And when it arrived during my senior year, it would prove once and for all that I'd been right to give up on him all those years ago. Act 6. The final proof and the golden child's departure. By my senior year at Desert Vista High School, I'd built a life that barely intersected with my father's world. I was student council treasurer, played varsity soccer, and worked part-time at the AMC Theater in Ahwatukee. My friends knew better than to expect my dad at any school events, and I'd learned to stop feeling embarrassed about his absence. Uncle Pete, along with my Aunt Rachel and my maternal grandparents, had become my real family, the people who showed up, who cared, who celebrated my victories and supported me through my challenges. The spring awards ceremony for Desert Vista's music program was a big deal. I'd been in jazz band all 4 years, playing saxophone, and had earned several awards for outstanding musicianship and leadership. The ceremony was held in our school's Performing Arts Center, a beautiful auditorium that seated about 300 people. Family members were invited to watch their students receive recognition, and afterward there would be a reception with cake and punch in the lobby. I'd learned long ago not to bother inviting Dad to these events. Over the years, I'd asked him to attend concerts, award ceremonies, soccer games, and school plays. His response was always the same. He'd say he'd try to make it, then inevitably have some excuse related to Amber's activities or needs. So this time I didn't even mention it to him. Instead, I asked Aunt Rachel if she'd like to come. She was Mom's younger sister, and she'd always made an effort to stay involved in my life despite living in Tucson. She drove up specially for the ceremony, bringing her camera and a proud smile that reminded me so much of Mom it sometimes made my chest ache. The ceremony was everything I'd hoped it would be. When they called my name to receive the Outstanding Jazz Musician Award, I heard Aunt Rachel cheering from the audience with the enthusiasm of a professional sports fan. She took what felt like 100 photos, and during the reception afterward, she introduced herself to all my friends and teachers as Kyle's very proud aunt. "Your nephew is exceptional," Mrs. Kim, our jazz band director, told Aunt Rachel. "He's been the backbone of our saxophone section for years. We're going to miss him terribly next year." Aunt Rachel beamed like I'd just been accepted to Harvard. "We're all so proud of him. He's going to do incredible things." On the drive back to our house afterward, Aunt Rachel was still buzzing with excitement. "Kyle, I hope you know how talented you are. That performance tonight was absolutely beautiful. You should be so proud of yourself. Thanks for coming, Aunt Rachel. It means everything to me that you were there." "Of course, sweetie. I wouldn't have missed it for the world." When we got to the house, Aunt Rachel insisted on taking more photos of me with my awards on the front porch. "These are going straight to Facebook," she announced. "Everyone needs to see how accomplished my nephew is." I appreciated her enthusiasm, even though social media attention wasn't really my thing. But Aunt Rachel was so genuinely proud, and it felt good to have someone in my family who thought my achievements were worth celebrating and sharing. The next morning, I was getting ready for school when Dad appeared in the kitchen with a confused and slightly irritated expression. "Kyle, why didn't you tell me about your awards ceremony last night?" I paused in the middle of making my usual breakfast of toast and orange juice. "What do you mean?" "I saw the photos on Facebook. Rachel posted pictures of you receiving awards at some school event. When were you going to mention this to me?" The question caught me so off guard that I almost laughed. "Dad, when have you ever come to one of my school events? Why would I expect this time to be any different?" His face reddened slightly. "I would have loved to go, Kyle. I'm proud of your accomplishments. I just need to know about these things. In all the years I've been winning awards and performing in concerts, you've never shown up once." "Not once, Dad. You've always had something more important to do. Usually something involving Amber." "That's not fair, Kyle. I've been busy, but I care about your achievements." The words hung in the air between us, and I could see he was trying to convince himself as much as me. But we both knew the truth. The only reason he was upset now was because other people had seen the Facebook photos and were probably wondering why he wasn't there. It made him look bad, and that bothered him more than missing the actual event had. Later that day, I learned from my cousin Brett that Dad had called Uncle Pete, furious that his brother had attended the ceremony in his place. According to Brett, it had been quite the phone call. "Your dad was pissed," Brett told me during lunch at school. "He accused Uncle Pete of trying to replace him or something. But Uncle Pete just told him the truth, that you'd never even asked your dad to come because you knew he wouldn't show up." "What did Uncle Pete say to that?" "He told him exactly what you said this morning. That in all these years your dad has never prioritized your events over Amber's stuff. He said if your dad wanted to be involved in your life, he needed to actually start showing up." For a brief moment, maybe 2 weeks, Dad seemed to make an effort. He asked about my college applications, complimented me on a good report card, even suggested we go see a movie together. I was cautiously optimistic that maybe, finally, something had clicked for him. But then Amber won some regional cheerleading competition, and just like that, I was forgotten again. Dad was back to his old patterns, driving her to extra practices, buying her new uniforms, posting about her victories on his own Facebook page with the pride he'd never shown for any of my accomplishments. I realized that night that nothing was ever going to change. Dad would always see Amber as the child worth celebrating and me as the child who should be grateful for whatever scraps of attention he occasionally threw my way. So I stopped hoping. I applied to colleges, planned my future, and built my independence. And when I graduated as salutatorian of my class, second in a class of 387 students, Uncle Pete and Aunt Rachel cheered from the audience while Dad sat next to them checking his phone for updates on Amber's summer cheerleading camp. That fall, I left for Arizona State University with a partial academic scholarship, excited to start fresh in a place where I could build relationships based on who I was rather than who my father wished I could be. But life has a funny way of coming full circle. And Dad's worst fear, losing his precious golden child, was about to become his reality in a way that would leave him desperate, alone, and finally understanding what he'd thrown away. College was a revelation. At Arizona State University, I was just Kyle. Not Kyle the disappointment, not Kyle the son who could never measure up to his perfect sister. I was Kyle the saxophone player who joined the jazz ensemble, Kyle the business major who made Dean's List every semester, Kyle the resident advisor who helped freshmen adjust to dorm life. For the first time in my life, I was valued for who I was rather than constantly compared to who I wasn't. I came home occasionally holidays, summer breaks, but the dynamic never changed. Dad still orbited around Amber's world while treating me like a distant acquaintance who happened to share his last name. Amber was now at Phoenix Country Day School, playing volleyball and running track, dating the captain of the basketball team, and still wielding her power over Dad like a magic wand. One batting of her eyelashes, one pouty lip, one dramatic sigh, and he'd move heaven and earth to make her happy. I graduated from ASU with a degree in business administration and immediately landed a good job with a marketing firm in Scottsdale. I found an apartment in Tempe, close enough to Uncle Pete and Aunt Rachel but far enough from Dad's house that I could live my life without constant reminders of my second-class status in his world. For the next few years, I built the life I'd always wanted. I had a career I enjoyed, friends who appreciated me, and even started dating a wonderful woman named Isabella who worked as a teacher in the Paradise Valley School District. She couldn't believe the stories I told her about Dad's favoritism. "That's not normal family dynamics, Kyle," she'd say, shaking her head. "Parents aren't supposed to have obvious favorites. You deserved so much better than that." Meanwhile, Amber had graduated from high school and was attending the University of Arizona in Tucson on a partial volleyball scholarship. Dad drove down every other weekend to watch her games, turning her college matches into mini vacations where he'd stay in expensive hotels and take her out to fancy dinners afterward. When I mentioned that I'd made a big presentation at work that landed us a major client, he'd nod absently and change the subject back to Amber's latest athletic achievements. But then, during Amber's junior year, everything changed. It started with a phone call from Amber announcing that she was serious about her boyfriend, Trevor, a pre-med student she'd been dating for about 8 months. Trevor was from an affluent family in Tucson, and Amber was spending more and more time with them instead of coming home to Phoenix on weekends. "Dad, you're going to love Trevor's family," she gushed during one of our rare family dinners. "His parents are so sophisticated, and they have this amazing house in the foothills with a pool and everything. His mom knows all about art and culture, and his dad is a surgeon at University Medical Center." I could see something shift in Dad's expression, a flicker of unease that he tried to hide behind his usual doting smile. "That sounds nice, sweetheart. But you'll still come home regularly, right?" "Oh, of course, Daddy," Amber said, but something in her voice suggested otherwise. Over the next several months, Amber's visits home became increasingly infrequent. She'd make excuses about studying, about volleyball practice, about social events with Trevor's family. When she did come home, she seemed different, more sophisticated, more critical of our modest house in Phoenix, more interested in talking about the cultural events and fine dining experiences she was enjoying in Tucson. Dad tried desperately to compete. He started planning elaborate outings when she visited, expensive dinners at fancy steakhouses, shopping trips to upscale malls, weekend getaways to Sedona. But it was clear that whatever he could offer paled in comparison to the lifestyle Trevor's family provided. The inevitable happened during Amber's senior year. She called Dad on a Tuesday evening in March with news that would shatter his world. I happened to be visiting that night, a rare occurrence, but I'd promised to help Dad fix a broken garbage disposal since he'd never been particularly handy with repairs. I was under the kitchen sink with a wrench when his phone rang. "Hi, sweetheart." Dad answered with his usual enthusiasm whenever Amber called. But as the conversation progressed, I could hear the change in his voice. The enthusiasm faded to confusion, then to something that sounded almost like panic. "What do you mean moving to Tucson permanently?" he asked, his voice tight. "Honey, this is your home. Your family is here." I couldn't hear Amber's side of the conversation, but I could imagine it. She was probably explaining how Trevor had been accepted to medical school at the University of Arizona, how his family had offered to help them get established, how she'd found a job at a marketing firm in Tucson and planned to build her life there. But Amber, what about us? What about our relationship? Dad's voice cracked slightly. You can't just move away and abandon your family. The irony was so thick I could taste it. Amber could abandon family, but I never could, even though he'd been effectively abandoning me for years. The phone call ended with Dad promising to drive down the next weekend to talk everything over in person. But when he hung up, he looked like he'd been hit by a truck. Kyle? He said, as if suddenly remembering I was there. Amber's talking about staying in Tucson after graduation. Permanently. That's normal, Dad. Kids grow up and move away. It's what people do. But she's different. She's special. We have such a close relationship. I wanted to laugh, but the pain in his voice was too real, too desperate. This was his worst nightmare coming true. The golden child, the daughter who looked like his beloved wife, the person around whom he'd organized his entire existence, was choosing someone else's family over his. Over the next few months, I watched Dad spiral into something approaching depression. He'd call Amber constantly, but she'd grown busy and distant. He'd drive to Tucson uninvited, only to find her unavailable or distracted by her new life. He started showing up at family gatherings talking about how alone he felt, how no one cared about him anymore, how he'd lost the most important person in his life. The complaints fell on increasingly deaf ears. Uncle Pete, Aunt Rachel, and our other relatives had watched him neglect me for years. They'd seen him prioritize Amber's minor problems over my major achievements. They had little sympathy for his current situation. "You made your bed, Tom," I heard Uncle Pete tell him during a 4th of July barbecue. "You can't spend 2 decades treating one kid like he doesn't matter and then expect everyone to feel sorry for you when your favorite child moves on with her life." But Dad was too wrapped up in his own pain to see the bigger picture. In his mind, he was a devoted father who'd been unfairly abandoned by an ungrateful daughter. He couldn't recognize that Amber was simply doing what children are supposed to do, growing up and building an independent life. And then came the day that would force us to have the conversation we'd been avoiding for 20 years. It was a Saturday afternoon in October when Dad showed up at my apartment unannounced. I was grading papers for Isabella, who taught 5th grade and often brought work home on weekends. When I opened the door and saw him standing there with red-rimmed eyes and a defeated expression, I knew this wasn't going to be a casual visit. "Kyle, we need to talk," he said without any of his usual pleasantries. I let him in, offered him coffee, and waited for him to explain why he'd driven across town to see me, something he'd never done in all the years since I'd moved out. "I've been thinking a lot lately," he began, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "About family, about relationships, about what's important in life." I nodded, still waiting. "Amber's built this whole new life in Tucson and I barely exist in it anymore. She's got Trevor's family now and they can offer her things I never could. I feel like I've lost her completely." "Dad, she's not lost. She's just grown up. She's building her own life, which is what kids are supposed to do. But we were so close, Kyle. She was everything to me after your mother died. She was all I had left of Rebecca." And there it was, the conversation we'd been dancing around for years. The admission I'd been waiting to hear since I was 8 years old. "What about me, Dad?" I asked quietly. "What am I to you?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. He looked at me with genuine confusion, as if he'd never considered it before. "You're my son, of course. You're important too. But I'm not all you have left of Mom, right? I don't look like her, so I don't count the same way Amber does." The silence stretched between us, heavy with 2 decades of unspoken truth. "Kyle, that's not. I mean, you have to understand." "No, Dad, I think I understand perfectly. You've spent my entire life treating me like I'm less important than Amber because she reminds you of Mom and I don't. You've made it clear that she's the child you treasure and I'm the child you tolerate." His face crumbled, and for a moment I thought he might actually apologize, might finally acknowledge what he'd done to our relationship. Instead, he said the words that would end any possibility of reconciliation between us. "Kyle, you have to understand, when I look at Amber I see your mother. When I look at you." He paused, searching for words that would somehow make this better. "When I look at you I just see. You're not her. You're not Rebecca." The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. After 20 years of feeling like the unwanted child, I finally had confirmation from his own lips. I wasn't enough because I wasn't Mom. I never had been, and in his mind I never would be. "I think you should leave, Dad," I said quietly. "Kyle, wait, that's not what I meant." "Yes, it is. It's exactly what you meant, and it's exactly how you've treated me since I was 8 years old. You've made it crystal clear that you have one child you love and one child you're stuck with. He tried to backtrack, tried to explain, tried to find some way to undo what he just said. But the damage was done. The truth was finally out in the open, and we both knew there was no taking it back. I don't want a relationship with you, Dad. I don't want you calling me, visiting me, or pretending that you care about my life. You made your choice 20 years ago when you decided that only one of your children was worth your love. He left that day broken and defeated, finally understanding that his obsession with Amber hadn't just cost him one child, it had cost him both. Because the truth was, Amber had outgrown her need for his excessive attention and moved on to build her own life. And I had long since given up hoping he'd ever see me as worthy of his love. Dad had spent so many years investing everything in the child who looked like Mom that he'd failed to notice the child who needed him most. And now, at 62 years old, he was finally learning what I'd known since I was 15. That unconditional love isn't really unconditional when it comes with conditions he'd never been willing to meet. The golden child had moved on, and the forgotten child had stopped waiting. Dad was alone, just as he'd chosen to be all along.